What's up, everybody? A very happy Monday here on the Refuse to Lose podcast. Brady Farkas with you from Roundtable Sports. Myself and Taryn, we are live in Detroit. Well, actually, we're on the outskirts of Detroit, getting ready for Game 3 of the American League Division Series. We'll be here for Game 3. We'll be here for Game 4. Hopefully, we're not going back to Seattle, at least in a working capacity, because hopefully the Mariners can take care of the Tigers over the next 2 games. But it certainly won't be easy if the last 2 were any indication. As always, when I'm on the road, do not take my quiet demeanor for a lack of excitement or a lack of enthusiasm. It is 11 o'clock Eastern time. I am trying not to get thrown out of the hotel, so you will not hear me screaming, but that does not mean that I am not busting with excitement on the inside as to what we saw, especially on Sunday night in the American League Division Series. Again, myself and Taryn Kovac, my cohort at Roundtable Sports, we are here on the outskirts of Detroit. We have avoided the downtown automakers convention that has taken over the city. So we are somewhere a half hour away from Comerica Park. I'm not even quite sure exactly where we are. Long day of travel, but we are here, and we are here for you. Obviously, at this point, the series is tied 1 game apiece. We are in Detroit for Game 3, which will come up on Tuesday afternoon, 1:05-ish Pacific time. That is if there's not any rain, although it looks like there is going to be rain that could impact the game. We have a great podcast for you. We're live on YouTube. We're also putting out the audio portion right after the podcast airs in video fashion. So however you're listening to us, whether you're watching us live or listening to us after the fact, we do appreciate it. As always, Taryn and I also appreciate anyone who reads and shares our articles. That is the number one way you can help us, is reading and sharing our articles at Mariners Roundtable Sports. You can Google us. You can find us there. Seattle Mariners Roundtable, Roundtable Sports Mariners, Brady Farkas Mariners, Taryn Kovac Mariners, whatever you want to do to find us, we appreciate. And then, as I told you on Friday's episode, join our community. It is free. It is no paywall, no subscription. Join our Mariners Roundtable community. Engage with us. Get the conversation going. Bring your buddies in. That is the number one way that you can help us continue to grow in this kind of second act for us here in 2025. Adam Amin from Fox Sports and Fox Sports 1 is going to be with us here later in the podcast. He is calling the games for Fox Sports 1 with AJ Przinsky and Adam Wainwright. So I had a chance to catch up with Adam Amin earlier in the evening, not that long ago from when we went live. So you will hear that interview towards the end. But without further ado, let go.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
And here we go.
I should mention that you can also get in your comments if you're watching live. You can do that on YouTube, and we appreciate anyone who interacts with us there. You can also get comments in on X. Before we talk granularly about games 1 and 2, let me just step back big picture. This past weekend at T-Mobile Park in Seattle, it meant so much to me personally. And I know that it means a lot to all of us, and I know that it meant a lot to you, but it meant a lot to me individually and personally because, look, I've lived on the East Coast now for 30 years. Right? My most formative years were in Seattle. My fandom is rooted in Seattle. My allegiances are rooted in Seattle. But I've lived on the East Coast for 30 years now at this point, almost, right? I'm 35. I've been on the East Coast since I was 6. And when you are an East Coast Mariners fan, and I'm sure some of you are listening now, but if you are an East Coast Mariners fan, it is a generally very lonely existence. Growing up into an adult East Coast Mariners fan, I have had very few people in my life to talk about the Mariners with. And I've had an even lesser group of people that have cared when I've wanted to talk about the Mariners. And when you are an East Coast Mariners fan, there is very little sense of community. And to be there, to be in Seattle with the 47,000 fans in the ballpark, with the X number of fans that were riding the train, that were walking the street, that were in the airport, that were in the shops, to just be among Mariners fans, to feel the energy and to share conversation with some of you. It was a really uplifting experience because it gave me a sense of shared Mariners fandom that I haven't really had often before in my life. Right? When I would go as a fan to Yankee Stadium, or I would go as a fan to Fenway, and you see other Mariners fans there, there's the usual nod, there's the shared eye roll when something bad happens, there's the handshake from across the aisle or the high five from across the aisle, there's the marginal kind of back and forth for 3 or 4 minutes. But to actually be there among all of you and share in that in some way was a cathartic fan experience that I've never really had before. And it extended beyond the weekend as a whole into the morning. So Taryn and I left for Detroit at 11 a.m. Pacific time. And as we were leaving, and we were on the same flight, obviously, to come here, but as we were leaving, we were at the airport, and we get to our gate, and there was a DJ, a Mariners DJ. There was a dance party at the gate. Every person on the flight got a Seize the Moment t-shirt. Every person on the flight got a Seize the Moment rally card. And the Mariner Moose was there, and it was just this party atmosphere, and almost every person there was in Mariners gear. They had the signs, they had the shirts, and again, it was just a shared sense of community that for me personally is very, very rare. Okay, it was very, very rare. And then to be on the flight and the flight attendants, before they're going over the safety procedures and the safety protocols, they're reading out Mariners stats. And when we get off the plane, the flight attendant or the crew is saying, hey, we hope the Mariners bring back the ALDS series win. And that stuff, while little, was a nice touch. And again, it's something that made me feel connected in a way that I don't usually get a chance to be connected. I want to shout out the flight attendant on our flight who came up to me. And at first I thought I was going to get thrown off the plane. But she came up to me and she said, hey, are you Brady? And I said, yes. And she said, I just want to tell you, I really love your podcast. And I don't say that as a brag or as in a way that, oh, hey, I got recognized. I just mean that my whole life, the goal has been to find other people who care about the Mariners like I do. Right? That's been my goal for a long time. I've argued with other friends on the backs of school buses about the Mariners. I've tried to share Mariners conversation or news or nuggets or tidbits or frustration in the school library, at the lunch table, in the dorm room. It doesn't matter. And I've tried to do that for years, and most people don't care. So when the flight attendant came up to me and said that she listened to the podcast, my first thought was, I'm finally doing what I've always wanted to do, and that is talk about the Mariners with other people who care about the Mariners, and to know that other people are out there listening and wanting to have Mariners conversation too. That is the community that I've always wanted to be a part of. So I appreciate her for listening. That made me feel good to know that this show is reaching people, and that the ability to have Mariners conversation both near and far is out there. So it was an awesome weekend. It was a great experience. Obviously, it's a 1-1 series. And lastly, before we get in again to kind of the granular things here, I've made a pretty substantial deal, I think, this year of kind of talking to you all about my emotions as a fan. I am still a diehard fan. I will always be a diehard fan, but I've told you that as I do this job more regularly, I have found myself being less emotional and more rational. And I wasn't always sure that I liked that, because there were times this year where I didn't get as worked up positively or negatively as I would have in the past. And I know it's because of the job. And I've wondered, man, there have been times where I wondered, man, like, should I have reacted more happily there, more angrily there? And I'm like, man, is my fandom changing? There came a point where I was wondering Is my fandom changing? Because this isn't affecting me in a certain way right now. And when I was there and I was amongst all of you, it was very clear to me, no, my fandom's not changing. I might be getting more professional. I might be getting better at separating my fandom from my job, but my fandom has not changed. And to be there with you and to feel the emotions and share them in that 47,000 plus, man, that was special. And I'm not too proud to admit I teared up at some of the video montages. They got to me, and it brought me back to a place where I was 5 years old, walking up the spiral staircase at the Kingdome and being in the Mariners Kids Club and dressing up as, a Mariners player for Halloween and mimicking Ken Griffey Jr. in the backyard. Like, that's what this weekend did for me. And I'm sure that's what it did for a lot of you as well. All right. Let's talk about game 2 first. Mariners win that one 3-2. Obviously, the 2 home runs from Polanco, the single or the double from Julio that gives the Mariners the lead in the bottom of the 8th inning. The first thing I want to do is give love to the crowd, because I will admit it. When I woke up on Sunday morning, I felt rather dejected and I felt rather despondent. And that was because you lose a heartbreaker in game 1. You know you've punted the advantages you had in game 1. You know that Skubal's pitching in game 2. You know that you're about to go on the road for games 3 and 4. And all of a sudden, all of the negative energy that we've had built up for 24 years, if you have been a fan for the duration of the home playoff win drought, every kind of worst case scenario was in at least my head walking into the ballpark on Sunday morning. And then you factor in the fact that, well, not directly related, the Seahawks lost right before the Mariners were about to take the field, and you just realize it just feels like the odds are stacked against Seattle this weekend, right? I don't know how many of you felt like that, but that is how I felt. So I walked into Sunday feeling rather dejected, and I walked into Sunday feeling rather pessimistic in that the Mariners lost a heartbreaker, the Seahawks lost a heartbreaker, and oh, by the way, Skubal is on the mound, and this has the potential to just be a terrible, terrible weekend. And while that is how I felt, I got to give credit. The crowd in the ballpark, they did not let each other feel that way. Okay. I think it was totally fair to feel how I felt, but the crowd brought it right from pitch 1. That crowd was as engaged as I've ever seen a sports crowd before, right? And I've been to, major college football games here and there. I've been to NFL games, and that crowd was just absolutely awesome. So I think the team played well, but I think the crowd brought it right from the start. And I think the crowd believed that the Mariners could win. I think the crowd believed, especially as the game went on, that the Mariners could win. And I think the crowd had something to do with uplifting the team in those moments, because it was hard to wake up and feel optimistic on Sunday, but the crowd brought the energy, and you couldn't have told that crowd that the odds were stacked against the Mariners. They were absolutely awesome. You also have to give credit to the Mariners for their resilience, because that has been a hallmark of Dan Wilson's kind of speeches and mantras all year. I keep diligent files of all of the audio I've acquired throughout the year, dating back to my spring training trip in February. So at this point now, 8 months worth of audio folders I have. And I'm sure I can find 15 clips of Dan Wilson talking about resilience and how important it is and the need for it and how he thinks this team has it. And I mean, Sunday night exemplifies what he's talking about, exemplifies the ability to get off the mat. I've said over and over again this season, I don't know how good the Mariners are, but I know how resilient they are. This has been a Dan Wilson hallmark all year. They refuse to go down. They refuse to go down easily. They refuse to give in, and they generally refuse to feel sorry for themselves. Okay. I was there in New York when they got swept by the Yankees, and it was I mean, to lose in a game where Brian Wu had a no-hitter through 7 innings, to lose that game in extras and get swept by the Yankees and then go on the road to Detroit, ironically, and sweep the Tigers takes real character. To get gut punched on a 2-7 East Coast road trip and then come home and go, I think, 4-2 takes character. To get gut punched on a 3-6 East Coast road trip. And I was there in Tampa when the Mariners played as poorly as a team can play over the course of 3 games. And then to come back after that and win, at one point 17 of 18 in September after that. I mean, that takes character. And this roster has it. This fan base has it. Again, I don't know that the Mariners are the best team left in the playoff field. I don't know that they're the best team in this series in some ways. But I do trust that they are not going to lay down. And while I might have felt as a fan like laying down on Sunday morning when I woke up, it was very evident that they didn't feel that way. And that is a testament to Dan Wilson. That is a testament to the leadership in that clubhouse. We think of the Mariners as a young team. We think of them as inexperienced. They're young in spots, but they're not necessarily that young. So it's credit to Dan Wilson, but it's also credit to Cal Raleigh and Julio Rodriguez and Josh Naylor and Gino and Luis Castillo and Andres Munoz, who's been a big leaguer now since 2019. It's hard to believe he's only 26. And Logan Gilbert and George Kirby, and these guys who have been here for 4 years or so. This is a veteran-laden group, at least in terms of experience, if not age. And they clearly are not going to let this team get down on themselves. It's one of my favorite qualities in people is resilience and is perseverance. And this roster has it. And you have to give them credit for that. The ability to get off the mat on Sunday in general, the ability to get off the mat on Sunday after the 8th inning when the Tigers tied the game in really an unfortunate kind of confluence of ways. There's just no quit. There's just no quit. And that's a quality. I can tell you this. You can't win the World Series based on grit alone. You can't. You have to have talent. You have to have pitching, bullpen. You have to have everything to win the World Series. But I can tell you this. You can't win the World Series if you don't have that stuff. And this team has it. This team has that thing, that resilience, that thing that allows them to push the bad aside and focus on the optimistic. Again, that will only take you so far if that's all you have, but you can't get anywhere without it. So it's a credit to Dan Wilson and the veteran clubhouse that he's now assembled. Beyond that, you want to talk about baseball itself in Game 2, there are heroes everywhere. You just have to pick. Okay. And that is why, in a lot of ways, Sunday was a beautiful baseball game, because there were heroes abound, both big, both small, both visible, both, more discreet. There's the obvious. There's Jorge Polanco with 2 home runs off the best pitcher on the planet from his non-dominant side. That's a heroic effort. There's Luis Castillo, a guy who, admittedly, I said a month and a half ago, I talked with Buster. I said, he seems to be at a career crossroads. He seems like he needs to evolve, but doesn't quite realize it himself. Credit to him. 4 2/3 innings, scoreless, 1 hit. Battled through some uncomfortable first 2 innings and gave this team 4 2/3. They would have loved 6. They really would have loved 5. He gives them 4 2/3. He did enough, and he did it well enough. Credit to him, because a month and a half ago, I was talking to people who didn't think Luis Castillo deserved to be on the playoff roster. Nevertheless, throwing 4 2/3 against the Tigers with the team's back against the wall. There's Gabe Spire, who threw a heroic effort not once but twice in games 1 and 2. To come in the 7th in one game and to come in the 5th in another, and to throw, an inning plus 2 times, that is something you're not asked to do in the regular season. And he did it. He's retired all 8 batters he's faced in the first 2 games. That's a heroic effort. There's Andres Munoz and Edward Bizardo, who were brilliant in what they were asked to do over the course of the first 2 games. And I give credit to both of them, because I told you, multiple times over the last 2 weeks that if I had one concern about the Mariners, it was their bullpen. And if I had one concern about the Mariners, it was the back end of their bullpen. And I was nervous about Bizardo's recent struggles and about Munoz's recent struggles. And there was Andres Munoz throwing 2 innings for the first time in his career since 2019, for the first time in 6 years. Andres Munoz throwing 2 innings on Saturday and then coming back and shoving again on Sunday. That's heroic because you're doing something you're not ever asked to do. He's never asked to throw 2 innings, and he's really never asked to throw 2 innings and then come back, and he dominated both times. Mentally, he was locked in. Physically, he was locked in. Bizardo, again, struggled his final 3 outings, non-clean. Excellent job both days. Those are heroic efforts. There's Julio. Julio, who we're told by regular fans is never clutch. There's Julio with 2 games, 4 hits, 3 RBIs, a home run, a double, a game-winning RBI. Like, what more can you want? We talk about big moments and big players make big plays in big moments. Well, there's your biggest players. Julio Rodriguez and Cal Raleigh carrying the offense for the weekend, in addition to Polanco, right? Cal, 4 hits. Julio, 4 hits. Cal setting the table, Julio cleaning it up. Those are heroic efforts there. I think Dan Wilson deserves a lot of credit for what happened in Game 2. I thought he handled the situation very well. I thought he handled it with an appropriate amount of aggressiveness. Bringing in Gabe Spire in the 5th. Taking Castillo out with only 1 hit given up. This was a deep-rooted roster contribution, games 1 and 2. It was a special, special win. It was the most meaningful win that I've ever seen in my adult life. And I think a lot of you feel the same way. I was at Game 1 of the 2000 ALCS. I was 10 years old. Okay? I was 10 years old. A lot of you have never even seen a Mariners division series win or above. A lot of you that are listening, the younger people in our audience, have never seen that. I was at Game 1 of the 2000 ALCS, and the Mariners won. And that meant a lot, but I was 10, right? I didn't know what was going to come and how hard it was going to be to get back to that point. This was the most meaningful win I've ever been a part of as a fan. It was special. The pen was special. Polanco was special. It was awesome. And I do want to say this. I think the Mariners owe A.J. Hinch a huge debt of gratitude because I think A.J. Hinch made an absolutely catastrophic error in Game 2. I think pitching to Julio Rodriguez was absolutely, in the 8th inning, was absolutely a catastrophic error. And I believe that it was a fatal error, right? I believe it was a fatal error in that game in particular. I mean, look at the scenario. It's the 8th inning. It's a 2-2 game. Cal Raleigh doubles. The base is open. Julio is up. If you walk Julio, you set up the double play. You at least set up the force. And you're going to Polanco, who, although he's had 2 home runs, he hit 2 home runs right-handed. He had not hit left-handed yet in that game. And Polanco, well, he doesn't run terribly. He doesn't run like Julio runs. So he is a much more likely double play candidate than Julio would have been. Obviously, Julio wasn't in a double play situation, but the fact that they had a base open, it did not walk Julio, was a catastrophic error in judgment as far as I'm concerned, right? There was all this hand-wringing about what Dan Wilson did or didn't do in Game 1, and we're going to get to that in a second. But for all the managerial talking points, I thought A.J. Hinch really gifted the Mariners that situation late in that game. And if I were a Tigers fan, I would be absolutely livid as to what went down in the 8th inning of Game 2. Because you can't sit here and say that A.J. Hinch gave the Mariners the game, but him pitching to Julio gave the Mariners the much better chance to go and win the game. Like, I would take my chances with Polanco hitting left-handed for the first time with a force in effect and a double play in effect over pitching to Julio. I thought it was a completely wrong decision. I tweeted about the questioning at the time, and I'm sticking to that. If I were a Detroit radio host today, I would be really strongly questioning what A.J. Hinch did there. All right, let's talk about our own manager. and let's talk about some of his decisions in game one, because he was getting skewered by Mariners fans all Saturday night. In a game the Mariners lost the Mariners lost in extra innings by a score of 3-2. I spent, let me say this, and I put this out on social media, and it is true. I spent a lot of Saturday doing something I don't usually do. A lot of Saturday night, I was getting emotional at the social media comments. Okay. And I shouldn't have done that. I wasn't mean to anybody, but I got so interested in beating back the Dan Wilson criticism that I really failed, I thought, that night at kind of considering everything. And sometimes, as I've said, when you get deep into this job and you're watching it and you're trying to be rational, you're trying not to be emotional, sometimes you are too deep into the forest to see the trees. And so I thought that maybe I defended Dan Wilson too much on Saturday night, maybe more than I should have, but I will maintain this to my grave. Dan Wilson did not cost the Mariners game one. Okay, we can sit here and say that Dan Wilson might have had a clunky process in certain situations. We can certainly question some things, but to sit here and say that he cost the Mariners the game on Saturday, I think is a wild exaggeration. Okay, I wrote this at Roundtable Sports for the Mariners, and I kind of pointed to 4 scenarios, and I don't have an issue with most of them. And even the ones that I question, I can't sit here and tell you that I'm 100% right and Dan was 100% wrong. Like, let's just kind of go down the list here. Mariners fans wish that Dan Wilson had pulled George Kirby in game one in the 5th inning, right? Kerry Carpenter hits the home run. Kerry Carpenter had great numbers against George Kirby. Carpenter hits the 2-run home run that gives the Tigers the lead at that point in the 5th. Mariners fans are mad that Dan Wilson didn't go to Gabe Speier. I personally had no problem with it. Okay, I personally had no problem with it. I understand what Gabe Speier did to Kerry Carpenter in game 2. I understand that Gabe Speier is an excellent lefty, but let's also remember this. If you burn Gabe Speier in the 5th, you don't have Gabe Speier for the 7th or the 8th. And I have to protect late in the game. And I understand the highest leverage situation might come in the 4th or the 5th, and you just don't know it at the time. But I can't lose Gabe Speier in game 1 in the 5th inning. I can't bring myself to do that. So, and I told you all along, and Buster said it too, we felt that the Mariners were going to be more aggressive with their starters. They were going to lean on their starters. So because I thought that, because I knew that, because Buster affirmed it, I was not surprised nor upset that George Kirby stayed in the game in the 5th inning. So that was question number 1. People were like, well, why didn't he go to Speier? I had no problem with it. Then others brought up the point, well, Brady, what if you walked Carpenter and let Kirby pitch to Riley Green right afterwards? You know, hey, Brady, Carpenter's got really good numbers against Kirby. If you want to stick with Kirby, why don't you just have him walk Carpenter to get to Green? And I could certainly reconcile that. But I will tell you also, I did not have a big problem with that either. Because can we sit here definitively and say that putting on more traffic, as George Kirby's in the 90s with his pitch count, do we really think that putting on more traffic with a tiring pitcher, and Riley Green, who hit 36 home runs and drove in 111, do we think that the best thing for the Mariners is to put more traffic on for the guy with 36 homers and 111? I can't unequivocally say that. So I'm disappointed in the result of George Kirby giving up the home run. I didn't have a problem with George Kirby staying in the game, and I didn't have a problem with George Kirby pitching to him either. He missed the spot. That's baseball. If you think that they went to the well one too many times on the high fastball, that's fine. Cal Raleigh admitted that. Cal Raleigh calls the pitches, not Dan Wilson. George Kirby throws the pitches, not Dan Wilson. So If you think that Dan made the mistake against Carpenter, it's not really a him problem, at least in terms of the pitch that was called and the pitch that was thrown. So I can't unequivocally say that that was the wrong move. So I think to sit here and say that he made the ultimate mistake there, I don't think it's anywhere near as egregious as what Hinch did. Lastly, going to Carlos Vargas in the 11th inning. Some people wanted to see Bryce Miller. Others wanted to see Emerson Hancock. I don't have a problem with Carlos Vargas getting the ball either. I understand Carlos Vargas is frustrating. I understand Carlos Vargas has the ability to do what Carlos Vargas did, which is walk the leadoff guy and throw a wild pitch. That said, Carlos Vargas had a 3.97 ERA this year. Carlos Vargas pitched in several leverage spots this year to varying degrees of success, and he had success in a lot of his outings. Bryce Miller has never pitched in relief, and Bryce Miller had an ERA of 5.7 this year. Can you tell me for certain that Bryce Miller was a better choice than Carlos Vargas? I don't think that you can. Emerson Hancock had an ERA, I believe, above 5.7 this year. Emerson Hancock, well, he had 5 consecutive scoreless outings to end the season. 3 of them came in blowouts, mop-up duty, and a spot start against the worst team in baseball, the Rockies. Do you really think, can you say unequivocally that Emerson Hancock was a better choice? Emerson Hancock, who's been exclusively in low leverage as a reliever. Can you say he was a better choice than Carlos Vargas, the guy who's got 70 appearances in leverage situations through the course of the year? I can't. What's unfortunate is that the Mariners didn't win the game by the 11th inning, so that even became a conversation. That's where the problem lies, that in game 1, the team was 0 for 28 with guys not named Cal and Julio. That's the problem. That's the issue. So I'm sorry that it got to the 11th inning pitching discussions at all. But once we got there, I can't sit here and say that Dan Wilson made the wrong choice. The thing that I would question the most about Dan Wilson in game 1, if you remember, there were 2 outs in the 11th and a runner at second, and Zach McKinstry was up, and Javi Baez was on deck. Zach McKinstry is a lefty. Javi Baez, who is on deck, is a righty. Javi Baez, who is on deck, is a free swinger and will chase anything. I believe that Dan Wilson should have walked Zach McKinstry to set up the force and get to the free swinger. And the force would have been a 3rd out, and the Mariners could have gotten out of the inning. That is what I believed was the right call, and that's the thing that I would question. That said, like I've said about all the other situations, I can't unequivocally say that I am right. Javi Baez went 5 for 11 in the wild card series and hit a ball hard to left field earlier in that game, I believe. Javi Baez has been a kind of notoriously big game player or a big moment player. He's won a World Series. So if Dan Wilson doesn't want to put more traffic on for a guy with Baez's resume, I can understand that too. I would have walked McKinstry and taken my chance with Baez. I would have. But I don't know that that's 1,000% the right move. So because I don't know it's 1,000% the right move, I'm not going to sit here and crush Dan Wilson for it. Dan Wilson maybe could have been smoother in his process. Maybe he could have walked McKinstry to get to Baez. To sit here and say that Dan Wilson cost the Mariners the game, to skewer him, to wish that he needed to be fired, that is a gross exaggeration as to what happened in game 1. The Mariners' offense was dreadful outside of Cal and Julio. They also did hit some balls hard fairly that got caught at the warning track. So the offensive production was dreadful. That's the biggest issue as far as I'm concerned in game 1, not Dan Wilson, and certainly not who he pitched in the 11th inning when he was down solely to unproven relievers and relievers who, are clearly mid-leverage to low-leverage guys. I'm not going to be on the Dan Wilson witch hunt over that. Okay. I thought the process could have been better. I would have walked McKinstry, but I think some of these things just evidence like baseball's hard. The decision for AJ Hinch to pitch to Julio Rodriguez, to me, that was an easy call. You're not going to pitch to the team's best or second best hitter. Take the bat out of the guy's best or second best hitter's hands. I'm asking to take the bat out of Zach McKinstry's hands. I can't tell you, Zach McKinstry and Julio are not the same, so therefore I'm not going to treat them with the exact same outrage. If you want to get in on YouTube, you can. If you want to get in on Twitter, you can. Now, I want to go out to the phone line. Earlier today, maybe an hour before we went on live here, I had an opportunity to catch up with Adam Amin. Adam Amin is the broadcaster for this series on Fox and Fox Sports 1. He's doing the games with AJ Pierzynski and Adam Wainwright. I have been told that this broadcast booth has been very, very good. I was not able to hear any of it by virtue of being in the press box, but that crew is in Detroit. I had an opportunity to catch up with Adam Amin. There are no graphics on this. I'm telling you, it was pre-taped. It's only about 7 minutes long, but because there's no graphics on it or anything, you're just going to see me kind of uncomfortably staring at the screen until the interview is over. It is only 7 or 8 minutes, and then we will be almost out of here after that. But Adam Amin, Fox Sports and Fox Sports 1. I simply started off by asking him, Adam, how are you?
I'm doing well, man. Good to talk to you again, as always.
Good to talk with you. Look, I know how I was feeling watching the games in the press box. How were you feeling with what you saw the first 2 nights in Seattle?
Yeah, it was an intense atmosphere. I mean, I've been fairly lucky the last several years when we go travel the country in October, and we usually run into some electric places. And for me, this was a funny series personally, because these are 2 of the ballparks that I've never called a game in the last 13 years of calling Major League Baseball. I've never called a game in Seattle. I've never called a game in Detroit. So I'm very excited to be in Detroit for the next 2. But it was electric, man. It was, you could sense the crowd's anxiety. You could sense their apprehension. You could sense the relief at times. You could sense the tightening as well when Detroit came back and tied it yesterday or the other day in game 2. It was very much a roller coaster for a fan base that is starving to try to win a home playoff game, and something they finally got a chance to do for the first time in 24 years the other night.
I was going to ask you about that. You've traveled the country and called games in the NFL, Major League Baseball, and some of the wildest environments there are. What was kind of your overall assessment of Seattle for, like you said, a fan base that has been starved, that has been anxious and waiting for this moment for a quarter century?
I happened to be in San Diego a few years ago. We were doing the ALDS, and this is when the Padres knocked off the Dodgers, and they went to the League Championship Series for the first time, and coincidentally enough, 24 years. They hadn't been since 1998, and they ended up going in 2022. And that was probably the best atmosphere I've ever seen for a baseball game. Game 4, San Diego has this big 7th inning comeback, and, it's raining. The last 2 innings are this kind of fever pitch run to the final out, and I think Seattle was kind of right up there with it. They kind of felt that same level of tension. They're playing, the Padres are playing a rival. You could feel that tension. I think the Mariners are just happy to be there a couple of years ago. Now they have expectation. So I think a lot of that plays into the psyche of a fan when they're trying to contextualize what's happening in front of them. And when you have a game, and two games really that we're back and forth, and the pendulum keeps swinging, and there's high drama on every pitch, I think that feeds into how you might see the reactions play out, and that's very much been the case in Seattle. And I imagine it'll be very similar. I imagine it'll be rocking in Detroit, and like I said, I can't wait to call these next couple.
Our listeners know the answer to this, but I don't, given that I was in the press box and I didn't get to hear the broadcast. I am curious how much, if any, second guessing was there from you and the crew, right? Saturday night, there was, should Dan Wilson have gone to the bullpen earlier? Should he have used Gabe Spire earlier? And then last night, should AJ Hinch have pitched to Julio Rodriguez in the 8th inning? Were those decisions that kind of resonated with you guys in real time?
Yeah, because in game 2, and AJ in particular, AJ Pierzynski, he's very skilled at this. There was a lot of talk at various points in his career, late in his, and now in his broadcasting career, should he be managing? Because he's always kind of thinking ahead about these things. And he was saying, this is the situation that Dan Wilson had in game 1, pitching to Kerry Carpenter, not bringing in the left-hander Gabe Spire for that moment. He wasn't going to make that same mistake in game number 2. So there was that questioning of the decision in game 1, and then you see what the result was, or the reaction was to it in game 2. And the decision to bring in Kyle Finnegan was a little bit of a question mark as well, just because he, pitched 4 out of 5. I think what it was, he was a little bit taxed. That was a bullpen that was taxed. And AJ Hinch is obviously going to try to get the outs he needs to get in the leverage spots that he feels are necessary and important. That's why you bring in Finnegan, who's been a workhorse for this group all season long. So I understand the thought process, but there was some questioning of it to think, well, is this the right guy at this moment? Are you chasing the game right now by bringing Finnegan in? It's a tie game, so that changes the scenario. Maybe that's why AJ Hinch felt a little bit more comfortable to bring in Finnegan again. So I think there is a little bit of thought process behind it. But, one thing about AJ Hinch, and he's always very clear about this, and I think he's one of the better tacticians in Major League Baseball when it comes to thinking the game through and thinking the game ahead. He also says, it's very easy to just look at the result and say, well, that was the wrong decision. And I know that's what the bottom line is always going to be, and I think he knows that too. But there is a thought process that goes behind certain things. The intent is never, well, let's go lose the game, obviously. The intent is always to go win it. So I trust his intent was right. He felt that was the best move in the moment, but it's understandable why you might be looking at it, the day after, and maybe even going into game 3, looking at that and thinking, was that the right move?
You've got a catcher in your crew. You've got a pitcher in your crew. Collectively, how much is your booth impressed with Cal Raleigh and his output and his story this year?
Very much so. And Pierzynski obviously is very high on Cal. He thinks he's the MVP. I would probably tend to agree. I understand that from my perspective, maybe it would come off as a little bit of Aaron Judge fatigue. But I also just have a lot of respect for what Cal has done to do what he's done offensively, and at the same time being behind the plate 120 times, this season, more than anybody else in the American League, catching 17,000 pitches, not giving up a pass ball, handling several pitchers, handling the entire staff that had multiple injuries. So you have multiple arms stepping in for the minor leagues and pitching in different roles throughout the season. To handle all of that with the level of care that he does, and to see the results play out the way they have these last couple of years with how good the pitching staff has been. And obviously the pitchers themselves deserve the most credit for that. But Cal has done such a good job of managing that, calling these games, being so heady in the scouting report, and on top of that, being able to put together the type of season that, players only dream of having. He's the MVP for AJ. I would certainly lean towards him in the MVP race. And I think Adam Wainwright is so respectful of Cal, because he knows what a good catcher can do for you, having had Yadier Molina for all those years in St. Louis. He is very well aware of how important a catcher is to a group's makeup when it comes to the pitching staff.
Look, Adam, the fans did double duty yesterday. Seahawks game at 1, Mariners game at 5. I know that would have been tight for you, but if we get to an LCS scenario, could you get the bosses at Fox for you to do the double play? Seahawks game at 1, Mariners game in the evening. Could you do both in the same day?
If I ever got the opportunity to do anything like that, I would jump at the chance to do it. There were some thoughts a couple of years ago. I'm trying to remember if maybe it was I think we were doing the Astros and Twins, and I think there was a Houston Texans game on a Sunday while we had a Houston Astros game maybe later that night. And I was kind of like, if you wanted, I could probably pull the double duty here. I've kind of thrown that out there a couple of times, but it just hasn't formulated just right. But if that opportunity ever came up in any capacity to pull off the doubleheader, I would jump at that chance. I just think I remember Joe Buck doing that for a San Francisco 49ers game, and then doing a Giants game in the playoffs, and kind of taking the trolley down in San Francisco. And I just thought I would love to do something kind of fun and crazy like that. And it's a test. It's a test of your abilities, and a test of your preparation, and a test of your limits in a way. I would jump at the chance if that ever came about.
Well, if the Mariners get to the LCS, we'll file that under good problems to have. Adam Amin, Fox Sports and Fox Sports 1. Adam, I'm in Detroit. You're in Detroit. We'll see you from Detroit in game 3, and hopefully the weather holds off for us so we can have a good, clean game. And in our case, hopefully a Mariners win. But we appreciate the work that you and your broadcast booth are doing. We appreciate a couple minutes today.
No problem at all, Brady. Thank you.
Absolutely. There he goes. That's Adam Amin, Fox Sports and Fox Sports 1. And he is great on the NFL. He's great on Major League Baseball. He also does the Chicago Bulls in the winter as well. So he's very, very busy from a broadcasting perspective. And again, by all accounts, I have not heard any of it, but by all accounts, the booth of him, Pierzynski, and Wainwright has been excellent. And I enjoyed hearing the kind of the comparison to Yadier Molina there from Adam, because I think that's a fair one, right? Like, Adam Wainwright knows how special and how important a special catcher is. So we talk about the MVP. Pierzynski believes it. Adam Amin believes it. And then sounds like Wainwright believes it as well. And they are questioning some of the decisions that are made kind of in the moment by both managers. And like I said 5 minutes ago or 10 minutes ago before Adam came on, I think the decision to pitch to Julio Rodriguez in game 2 was a fatal flaw, and Dan Wilson owes AJ Hinch a Christmas card for that one. All right, a couple news and notes before we get out of here. Again, we're live in Detroit. We're approaching midnight right now here on the YouTube stream. If you are listening to this later, again, we have put this interview out, or we will put this podcast out, I should say, on the Apple channel, on the Spotify channel. We appreciate all the support. We just had our biggest episode ever just a couple of days ago. One of the more recent ones was our biggest stream ever, so appreciate that. The YouTube stream is something that I personally would like to get more into as we move forward here. I don't think that, I'm ever going to become a YouTube dominant podcast, but I just think the ability to have other streams or other channels for people to watch on or listen to is a good thing. And that's kind of ultimately what we want to do, is expand our horizons and find more listeners and share the Mariners with more people. And then, of course, the written content is always going to be right there for us front and center. It's Roundtable Sports, Mariners Roundtable. Find us, join the community. Taryn is here as well. He's in the hotel as we speak, approaching midnight here too, getting ready for game 3. So we put a lot of work into everything we do, and we like to share it in as many ways as possible. And you can join that Mariners community for free. No paywall, no subscription. We want our site to be kind of the Mariners hub. We want you to come hang out, interact, read our stuff, listen to our stuff, see what interviews we've got, and then see how you guys can be part of the conversation also. All right, a handful of things left here before we get out of here. The big news right now is Josh Naylor. At this point, now, Taryn and I were on a flight. We were not in Dan Wilson's press conference availability earlier today because of it. But Ryan Divish, Adam Jude, Daniel Kramer, and others were. Dan Wilson told them that Josh Naylor did not make the trip to Detroit with the team. The team left last night after game 2. Josh Naylor was not with them. As of now, we do not know if Josh Naylor will play in game 3 or in game 4. Before everybody gets up in arms, let me just say this. Josh Naylor is allowed to miss up to 3 days. That's what the CBA calls for. If you're going to be angry about him not being here, understand it is legal for him to not be here. It is his contractual right. It is collectively bargained right for him to take up to 3 games. So don't even waste your energy being mad about it. It's something he can do. Josh Naylor's wife is having a baby. If, as much as I want the Mariners to win, if your response to that is anything other than congratulations, I hope everyone is healthy, then I think that's an unfortunate reaction. The Mariners are a better team with Josh Naylor. I hope he's here tomorrow. I hope he's here on Wednesday. But if he's not here for either or both of those games, he is allowed to not be here for either or both of those games. The question to me that becomes more interesting is this. If he's not playing, what do the Mariners do? Right? Like, what do the Mariners do if he's not here? There are a handful of options, none of which are, I think, particularly beneficial to the Mariners, right? Luke Raley can play first. He's not regarded as a solid defensive first baseman. Does not look that comfortable over there. Do you want him playing first base in the playoffs? Wouldn't be my first choice. He's also hitting 204 or 202 this season. You could put Gino over there. He's played all of 6 games in his professional career, or all of 6 innings, I should say, at first base in his major league career. That's more than a decade. You could put Ben Williamson at third, who's an excellent defender, but he hasn't played in the big league since the end of July. Has not seen big league pitching since the end of July. So in that case, you'd be moving a subpar, having a subpar inexperienced first baseman and a rookie third baseman who hasn't played in the majors in 2 months. I don't think that that's real beneficial. I'm going for secret door number 3. Okay. The thing that I would do is as follows. If Josh Naylor is not here tomorrow, I would put him on the paternity list. That makes him inactive. I would then fill his roster spot with Miles Mastrobuoni. And I would play Miles Mastrobuoni at first base. Handful of reasons. 1, it keeps Gino at third, where he's most comfortable. It gets Mastrobuoni in the lineup, who is a pesky at-bat. He's at this point, I think, a better at-bat than Luke Raley. And while I think Ben Williamson is also pesky, at least with Mastrobuoni, I get a veteran, and I get a guy who is left-handed against a right-handed starter in Jack Flaherty. Miles Mastrobuoni is not a traditional first baseman, but he is a traditional infielder. He knows how to field ground balls and he has fielded a lot of ground balls on the right side of the field because he's played a lot of second base in his life. So none of these things are particularly good for the Mariners if Josh Naylor's not here. But the series will go on whether he's here or not. So my suggestion is Miles Mastrobuoni, first baseman, at least for the day, against right-handed Jack Flaherty. That is where I am at, but we will know more tomorrow by the time we get to the ballpark. The game is at 4:08 Eastern time. Taryn and I should be there by about 10 a.m. So we will be kind of front and center on our coverage early in the morning here. And by the time a lot of you have woken up back in Seattle, we should be here in the ballpark and maybe have a little more information on everything. One thing the Mariners have to get better at, they cannot walk the leadoff guy anymore. Carlos Vargas walks the leadoff guy in the 11th, gives up a run, the Mariners lose. Matt Brash walks the leadoff guy in the 8th on Sunday. The air by Naylor follows and a double by Torkelson. 2 runs, Mariners almost lose. If you walk the leadoff guy, you are begging and asking for trouble, and that is something the Mariners cannot do. You cannot beat yourself at this time of the year. And when you walk the leadoff guy, you are beating yourself. And Luis Castillo walked the leadoff guy also on Sunday and got away with it, but that's not a formula of things that I want to be happening. You've got to pound the zone. Look, I get it. You don't want to make a big mistake. You don't want to give up a meatball, but you've got to be able to attack hitters in the zone. And Logan Gilbert's going to have an opportunity to do that on Tuesday afternoon. As we sit here now, I would say the Tigers have the series advantage. They're at home. They have the more rested bullpen. But the Mariners have the better starter. And we'll see if they can take advantage of that. We are live in Detroit for Roundtable Sports. We will be back at it again at some point in the next few days. At some point from Detroit in the next few days. I don't know if it will be after Game 3 or after Game 4 or both, but keep following on social media at Refuse to Lose Pod. I am here. Taryn is here. Mariners Roundtable is the site. Join the community. Engage in the conversation. Tell your friends about our written work. Tell your friends about the podcast. Shout out to the great flight that we were on. I'm still pumped up from that energy that was on that flight to Detroit. It was unlike anything I've ever seen before. And thank you all for a great weekend in Seattle. Mariners have the split. They'll go for the series lead on Tuesday. Hopefully the rain holds off and does not impact this game in any way, because I'd hate to see weather impact what's been a very exciting first 2 games here. Mariners going for the series lead. We'll be back at it again this week. Thanks to everybody who watched on YouTube. Thanks to everyone who will listen subsequently on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And as always, go M's.